My name is Dacia Clay. I'm the audio librarian here at Classical 91.7. While I'm a real librarian, I have a deep, dark secret. I know very little about classical music. I grew up listening to rock, and I know something about jazz. But when it comes to classical, but I really want to learn. So, every week on this show, a classical music expert will give me a piece of classical music they think I should know, and then we'll discuss it. Come learn with me in the classical classroom. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Classical Classroom. I am Dacia Clay, and here with me today for a second time in the classroom is classical guitarist Valerie Hartzell. Valerie started playing guitar at the age of 3 and formally studying at the age of 6. She later studied at the Peabody Conservatory and Radford University. She's performed all over Europe, Canada, and the U.S. Valerie is creator and director of the Classical Minds Guitar Institute and Competition. She's currently recording a new CD with producer Todd here in the Geary studio. So we kidnapped her to be on the Classical Classroom with us. Valerie, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for kidnapping me. I'm glad to be here a second time.
We're really nice kidnappers.
Yeah,
you don't
very
have
nice.
Stockholm Syndrome.
No harm done.
So what are you going to be teaching me about today?
Well, a couple of things. I think we're going to focus. Last time we were on the show, we discussed women and guitar just a tiny bit in the overlay of the classical guitar history. And it was just, we mentioned it in the 19th century as being an educational tool.
Right.
And that was basically it for that. So I thought today we could focus on the role of classical guitar and how it used to be one of the most popular instruments for women's education, and how it fell out of favor and then became a very dominated instrument in the, I would say, men world.
Yeah, in the man world?
In the man world.
Right, so we've got fewer women playing today than we did 100 years ago.
Yeah, over 100 years ago. I'd say 150 years ago.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And interesting, too. So, and I think, too, we were going to talk about a few lady luminaries in the classical guitar world.
There's some specific women who have paved the path along with everybody else. And, and one thing I like to do also is to talk about how women in guitar are no different than men in guitar. There's just, we are guitarists.
Yeah. What I'd like to do is to go back in our time machine to long, long ago.
A Doctor Who moment.
When, go back in the TARDIS, to when this wasn't the case for women in guitar, that it was not uncommon for women to play guitar.
Yes.
So let's start there. What was going on? What's the time period?
So it would be before the 1850s. So you would say early 19th century. You have an influx, I guess you could say, of the middle class, where people are starting to become the bourgeois. You had, of course, you had the church, and then you had the aristocrats that dominated the arts. And so say you're a bourgeois and you happen to be a merchant, and now your children, say you yourself were not well educated. It is important to you now that your children get the best education possible. Right. And both the boys and the girls would be educated in arts, music, and dance. And so for the girls, one of the popular instruments they had and they could afford was the classical guitar. And that became not only a solo instrument for them, but accompanying themselves with songs. So they would sing and play the guitar. They have parlor events where people would come in, family and friends, and the girls would come out with their guitars, and either they would play with other guitarists, or they would play solo, or they would get everybody to sing songs while they played the guitar. It's obviously an instrument that can move around quite a bit. You can go places, you can bring it with you.
Right.
So and that was your educational tool. However, in the 19th century, it was not common for women to go on stage. It was not accepted for women to perform in any field.
So at this point in the classical guitar land, it was acceptable for girls and young women to play the guitar in their homes to play
Right.
small recitals.
Informal recitals, nothing formal
Right.
where they're a star or
So ladies at this time, they're playing guitar like crazy, but kind of if they want to go bigger with it,
Right.
if they really want to make a career out of it, it's kind of not there for them. So
yeah, because it wasn't part of society at the point.
yeah,
I mean,
like are there any ladies that you could find
from that time, no,
Okay.
nothing.
All right.
Isn't it sad?
Well, what kind of music were these women playing at
Oh
home?
gosh, they were playing the hot composers of the time. And that's what's the wonderful
Yeah.
thing about the printing press. Once the printing press was invented in the 16th century, then people want music printed. They want themselves in the homes to be able to play it.
Yeah.
So they could actually buy and have access to published music, say Giuliani and Lignani. They all kind of rhyme. Rigondi, the Italian school, and you have Fernando Sor from Spain, who toured all over the place. I mean, Sor went to Russia. He ended up in France, and they would perform in halls with. It was like I think I mentioned this in the last show. It was a variety show where you would have a pianist perform, a guitarist, and you'd have maybe a small ensembles, chamber music. So it would be a variety show, maybe even a voice and piano or maybe an orchestra playing. So it wasn't like today where you go see an orchestra concert or an opera concert and you go see a full guitar recital. They did exist, but most of the time it was variety shows, which is really fun, like the Johnny Carson show. And so that was popular. And
Yeah.
so think about it. You have something in the halls. People are listening to it. It's like media. This is 19th century media.
Yeah.
You don't have Twitter. You don't have YouTube. So how do you get to listen to people? How do you know what's out there? What's the in thing? Is if you could afford it, you would go to the concerts. And the better way to be educated about all the instruments was to have these variety shows. Well, then guitarists, what they did is the composers became, there was a few of them like Jobet and Tarrega who became very shy. They're more introverted composers, didn't really enjoy performing on the big stage. They much prefer, more relaxed salon concert type things where it was more private. And one of these composers who wrote a lot, was a prolific composer, is Francisco Tarrega. Francisco Tarrega. There we go.
Yeah. Which is, for those of you out there who don't understand this lovely accent and the way that I did in the first time around, I thought you were saying Tarrega, and then I looked it up and realized it was Tarrega.
And there's an accent on the A.
Yeah, I think I even tried to
Tarrega.
Google search Tarrega, and I was like, this person does not exist, Valerie. What are you talking about?
And people have corrected me. They said Tarrega. As if there's an Tarrega, as there's an accent on the E, but there's no accents on the A, so it's Tarrega. I'm not even Spanish, I'm French, so my R rolling is pretty bad. So I want to say on the back of the throat, Tarrega, but...
So basically these guys, these luminaries, they were shy guitarists.
They were shy guitarists. Well, and you think about Tarrega, the problem with Tarrega is he also couldn't see very well. So I don't know if that contributed. He wasn't fully blind, but he had been, supposedly there was an accident where he fell, and one of the mean nanny pushed him. And he's been misbehaving and he pushed him, and I think there was some kind of water that was polluted and it got into his eyes and he couldn't see. So I don't know if that contributed to his shyness at all, or had absolutely nothing to do with it, or if he just was shy. I mean, Chopin was very shy, and so I don't know if that was just him.
Yeah.
The classical guitar back then didn't look like our guitars now. They were smaller, they didn't have as much power, they didn't have much presence as they do now.
Okay.
So possibility also was that they just didn't feel like they could fill out the halls as well.
Yeah.
So that's an issue, no microphones.
We can't do this. We can't. Amplifiers have not been invented yet, and so we have to stop.
So we're going to be in someone's home. And I think salon concerts have their place. They're very interesting, and they bring an intimacy to an otherwise, when you're in an audience, you are very distanced from the performer. So it is neat to have a salon concert because you really get to watch their hands up close.
Yeah.
Like on a YouTube, you can watch their hands, and then they'll take the camera and they'll go really focus closely on the hands.
Yeah.
But of course, you can't do that in the hall. In a big hall, you're so far away. Even in a smaller hall, you still can't get that close. So salon concerts do have their spot, but unfortunately, guess what? When you have a select few people that know Tarrega and they would go to his homes, you don't reach the broader people.
Right.
It starts to get less and less popular.
So
and
it's
then,
basically sort of a survival of the fittest thing was going
Right.
on. They were sort of slowly dying off
Disappearing.
from the social
right.
sphere. Like they
Right,
were sort
social
of-
media.
Yeah. So the social media at the time was not a very what's the word that I'm looking for? It wasn't very amenable to their particular needs.
Exactly. So, but for the meantime, I like to play, maybe if that's okay, a Tarrega piece.
I would love to hear it.
So if you were in the 19th century, say you were at the end of the 19th century, and you want to go see a guitarist, and you're in Spain, you would get to see Francisco Tarrega.
Or Francisco Tarrega, as I might say.
But he was a pianist, by the way. He was a pianist and a guitarist, yes. And he was encouraged to go study piano in Madrid and composition. And thankfully, the teachers there said, maybe you should go do guitar. And I don't know why they said that, but I think they were very impressed with his guitar playing. I don't think it was a derogatory statement towards piano skills, but I think they were just, there wasn't that much in composition for a classical guitar, and I think they encouraged him to go that direction.
I see. Okay.
And so he did, and that's why we have pieces that are characteristic type pieces like Polonaise and polkas and mazurkas. He would have been influenced, of course, by the great Frideric Chopin. That's who he would have heard, probably studied as a pianist.
Yeah.
So that's his influence is from the piano repertoire, which is kind of interesting.
That is cool. That's neat.
And since I'm talking about women in guitar, I'm going to play a woman piece. And her name is Rosita. It was one of his daughters.
Okay. That was lovely.
Thank you. It's a very cute piece. And it's just funny that he had all these daughters named Maria. And so he had to nickname them all. And so this is one of the shorter character pieces that he wrote.
Nice.
Yeah.
I like that.
So you would have heard this in a nice, intimate evening concert at someone's house.
So this, he was playing, tell us again when he lived, Tarrega?
He would have been at the end of the 19th century into the early part of the 20th century. So before Segovia.
Okay. So guitar in general at that point had sort of fallen out of the public view. It's become less popular.
Right.
So where do we go from there after?
Well, I think from there we continue our travels in Spain. And we have the young Andrés Segovia from Spain, who really became, one of his missions was, and it was, his parents were really against him, his father in particular, did not want him to be a guitarist. Because it was at this point in time, the guitar was a street instrument in Spain. And I don't know anything about flamenco guitar, but I'm hoping one day you'll have some flamenco classroom discussions.
Oh, yeah.
But because that's the music, that's a very popular music of Spain still today. Of course, it's growing and growing. But I think there were some stereotypes of what street music it was, and guitar would have been considered street music in the beginning of the 20th century.
Okay.
And Segovia was saying, well, no, it's not. It's just that these composers really aren't pushing the instruments in the hall, and we need bigger, better instruments. And Torres was it's the model. It is most of our classical guitars today are based off the Torres model, which is the fan bracing system inside the instrument. So Segovia's demands were a bigger, better instrument, going in the concert halls with these bigger, better instruments, getting composers to our side because there was a lack of composers writing for the classical guitar. And lastly, education. How do you get people to respect your instrument? Well, you need to have it in the schools.
Right. Yeah. If it's not being taught in the schools alongside of the other instruments that are well respected, then it's not sort of garnering attention and a name for itself. And
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's something we're going to talk about today, about how one of my, I don't know if it's appropriate to talk about my challenge now. Is that okay?
You can talk about it whenever you like.
Okay.
You're my teacher, so I respect your authority.
Well, authority, okay. Well, what I like to challenge, and this is something I want to mention that is becoming better and better, is education, and that being a powerful tool in the respect of our own instrument. And there are people who are working very, very hard in Houston and Austin and really all over the United States. Think about it this way. You go to school, you're in high school maybe, or even middle school, and you pick an instrument. One of the most popular things in Texas is marching bands.
Yeah.
Why? Because they go with football.
Right.
So naturally, you say, oh, well, I want to play the clarinet or the flute or whatever. And what if you don't have any other option? That's a problem. How do you get into guitar if there is no guitar program
to get into?
But there are many schools in Houston that have, not enough, but there are beginning to have some really good schools in Houston with guitar programs. Nice. And one of note for high school is the Bel Air High School. And Edward Grigacy and Mark Moore we need to take our hats off to these guys because they have a well-established school right now, and they've got, I think, last time I heard, they have a couple hundred students in guitar classes.
Nice.
There were boys and girls between the ages of, I would say, as young as 14 and as old as 18 in the program. But we can do better than that. It needs to go in the elementary schools. Yeah. Because you see children, they're not biased. They don't understand what's cool, what's not cool. They don't have opinions yet when they're 6. 7, 8.
I don't know. I was a really cool 6-year-old. I thought I was, at least. Anyway, sorry. Please continue.
Oh my gosh, that's so funny. Okay.
No, you're right. You're right. Like little kids kind of don't have these preconceived notions of like what's the cool instrument to play and what's not, which is why Todd started playing trombone. Then 'cause he didn't know any better.
That's why we can rag on the engineer. He can't say anything. He's on the other side of the wall until he cuts the microphones.
Yeah, no, he does have a lot of power, actually. That should be nice.
We should be careful.
Yes, that too. I want to get back to Segovia. So Segovia comes up and says, we've got to make these instruments bigger. Yes. And we, so that they can compete in the halls. Right. And then he also had some influence on getting the programs established in the schools as well, and things like that. So classical guitar starts to make a comeback. Yes. And where do ladies fall into this?
Here it is. The first person I'm going to talk to you about is, her name is Ida Presti. Segovia heard her play. This is when it brings it in. And Segovia had been, an illustrious career by the time he heard her play. And he basically says, you'll never need to learn anything from anyone else after he hears her play. He basically says, this is it. You've got it all. He was highly impressed by her as a solo artist because, remember, this was a new thing for women to be touring as a solo artist. And she liked apparently to play jokes on people, too. Nothing light about Ida Presti. Apparently, she was a jokester. She liked to play practical jokes on her students, which I love to do, too. And apparently on her husband, Alexandre Lagoya. So, okay, so then I just want to mention just real quick here about I don't know why, but it seems like a lot of the people I was doing a little research on seem to come from the French school. And it's not biased. I mean, because obviously I'm French, so my heritage is from the French school. And I did study with Alexandre Lagoya, which is her husband. She taught him.
Really?
Yes, she taught him. That all
Nice.
when they say that right hand technique, they say the Lagoya technique. No, it's not the Lagoya technique. It's the Presti technique that was then taught to Lagoya. And unfortunately, nobody plays like this anymore. Nobody uses this right hand technique. And
what is this right hand technique that you speak of?
okay, right. I should probably specify. Okay, well, the right hand is the one that controls the sound. Our right hand is the one that creates the pitch. The left hand is the one when you put the finger down.
Yeah.
If right now I have a finger down on my left hand, but you can't hear anything, can you?
No, I cannot.
Because my right hand is the one that creates the sound.
Right.
And so you can play like this. Does that sound pretty?
No.
No, not so much, right? Does that sound pretty?
Sounds better.
Yeah, much better.
Yeah.
So our right hand controls the tone of the note that my left hand is now placing. By the way, it's a G, in case you're curious.
So your left hand is on the fretboard,
Right.
pressing down the strings. Your right hand is over the round holy thing.
Yes.
Plucking.
Yes.
Which
around
has
the
a
sound
technical
hole.
name, I'm sure.
It's got a rosette.
A rosette.
It's
or
a rosette.
a round holy thing.
It's a round holy thingy.
Yeah.
So yes, the rosette and your sound box is between the rosette or the sound holy thingy and the bridge.
And the bridge.
And so usually you want to keep it around the rosette area because that's where we call the sweet spot of the instrument, which is your loud area.
Yeah.
And the philosophy of where and how you keep your hand in that area will create an ugly tone or a pretty tone.
I see.
A strong tone or a weak tone.
Gotcha.
So this would be strong. Okay. Now, if I want something ugly, not so pretty, right?
Yeah.
So classic guitar is actually it's a difficult instrument to play because your right hand does a lot, and it's very right hand intensive. All the control, all the tone, the power comes from that one hand. And there's been battles for the 19th century, there's a battle, nail or no nail?
Right.
And nail won because that's our pick, that's our plectrum. And then there's discussions on how to create the nail, et cetera, which I won't bore you with. But if you want to know, I could give you a manicure after the show.
But Ida Presti, she came up with a special
Yes.
technique for using your right hand.
Yes.
Is that...
Well, but what her idea is we don't have a lot of muscles in our hands. It's mostly tendons and ligaments and all this other junk. So the muscles are in the back of your hand here, the stringy muscles in the back of your hand.
Yeah.
And then you have this big fat muscle right where the thumb is. And so the idea is when you take your hand, how can you create a lot of power and then using the gravity to really push? So what she would do is she would take her hand, she would drop it, her hand to the side and shake it out, right? Then you would bend your arm up that it looks like you're saying, I swear solemnly in court, blah, 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 right? And after you do that, so then you take your fingers on the first string, okay? You put your thumb on the first string, you bring it closer and closer to the first string, and then you bring it back. So now I'm sitting more with a right angle. You see this?
I see, yeah.
It's more of a right angle here.
Your hand is pointed down.
Right.
Yeah.
And that and unfortunately for me to demonstrate would be almost impossible because I would need to shape my nails. Because think about it, right now my nails are pointing the other direction on the left side of the nail. So that's why nail shape is important for classical guitar. Because right now, that doesn't sound so good. But this is the idea is that the thumb, and I used to play this way, by the way. That's how I used to play. All my recordings from the 80s and early 90s was this way. You can actually get a lot of power. And there's a video of Alice Arts, and she discusses the right-hand technique of how to put your hand on the string and how it works. Cool. So if anybody's curious about how she does it, and Alice Arts was one of the premier students with Ida Presti. And so she really is one of the few people in the United States who kept that going. Okay. One last thing I want to mention about Presti is this quote that she said, and this to me sums up her feelings of guitar. And I'll read it first in French. Je veux que ma vie soit simple et droite, comme un roseau vide, afin que Dieu puisse l'emplir de musique. Which means I want my life to be simple and right, as one reed empties so that God may be able to fill it with music. Nice. So, yes. So I think that pretty much sums up how Presti felt about music, how important it was to her. She did over 1,000 concerts with her husband, Alexandre Lagoya, retired from the solo stage, and all the way up into 50s, 60s, 70s, records were made with the duo. And they have a massive repertoire that was created thanks to them for guitar ensemble.
Nice.
So, yeah, and there's the favorite piece is a duo by them that they arrange. I think that's one of the favorite recording for most people is the Chaconne by Frideric Handel. So that's about Presti. Well, since Presti, we've had many women. We have established women since Presti, such as Leona Boyd, who also studied with Alexandre Lagoya and Ida Presti. Ako Ito, who's a Japanese teacher in Nice, who studied with Ida Presti and Lagoya. And, of course, the American guitarist Alice Arts, who was probably the closest to Ida Presti, and actually was there when on the phone with Lagoya when she passed away, when Ida Presti passed away.
Wow.
So very, very close to them. Well, what happens after this with women in guitar? Well, we have Sharon Isbin. She became famous in that she's really, her career started, I would say, in the 70s when she started winning these competitions.
Yeah.
Studied with Oscar Gilia. Was the first person to start a program at Juilliard. That really helped with, that's what I think one of the biggest programs in the United States that I think that really helped guitar being taken seriously is there's a guitar program at Juilliard. Yeah. And it's thanks to Sharon Isbin. And one thing I would like to talk about, I think a part of our education is how to understand that an instrument is an instrument and the performer is the performer. That's not, this is a female performer, this is a male performer. And how do we go about that? Because
how do we keep it from being a gendered thing and simply see talent where talent is?
Exactly.
And
well said.
And desire and passion. Where
does that come
things,
from?
Apart from what somebody's gender might be.
What I want to feel is, look at how the guitar has evolved. Mm-hmm. Look how we've evolved, and now it is an instrument popular no matter what race, what culture, what age, what gender. And that's where I think the classical guitar needs to go to. Is that we need to throw away the idea of this instrument belongs to a certain category or a certain culture or a certain male versus female. And I think education is the tool to that.
I think that is probably true for many instruments. It's funny kind of what winds up becoming gendered.
Yes.
And, you know, what we've kind of unpacked a little bit of why women sort of stopped playing the guitar.
Right.
And why it is that they're still sort of in a minority.
Right.
And there are stories like that behind so many things.
Yes.
I'm glad to hear that it's making a comeback.
Definitely.
The idea of anybody being discouraged from doing something that they're passionate about. And sometimes I don't even think it's discouragement. I think it's more like...
lack of knowledge.
Well, lack of knowledge and just sort of lack of exposure.
Yes. How do you know it exists?
Going, well, I don't know anybody else playing this instrument.
Right.
You know, how... people can't know to play something unless they've seen somebody else doing it. And I think that if you're seeing one group or another, if you're a dude, for example, who wants to play a female-dominated instrument, I'm sure that's very intimidating, and maybe you feel a little bit weird about pursuing that. Same for a woman.
Same thing
playing
for a woman playing another instrument.
Guitar, you know, it's like you walk into a master class full of dudes, and you feel a little bit intimidated.
Out of place.
I think that can be discouraging. And I'm glad to hear that's getting changed.
And
education.
I just want to mention something that is interesting and my experience of noticing in when I go on tour and I do master classes. I always ask, how long have you been playing? How did you start? I would say it's changing now, but it was for a while. It was 90 to 95% of the time that was usually men in these colleges who would say, I started out as a metal guitarist or jazz guitarist or rock. Most of the time it was rock and roll. And when you think about how many rock and roll bands and people that you know from either family or friends, a lot of it is a bunch of guys getting together, you know, playing just rock and roll in their garage. And then they tend to go, I really want to do this, but what can I do with electric guitar? And they said, oh, there's this classical guitar stuff at this school. I can sign up for this. I wonder what this is. And then they end up signing up for classical guitar lessons.
Well, that's an interesting theory on like why it might be sort of male dominated is because of where classical guitarists come from.
Yes.
They're sort of coming out of these other kinds of music that kind of have a little bit of machismo thing going on.
Yes.
And that women aren't
usually
kind of typically part of.
Yeah.
And so when you're pulling from that pool into the classical guitar pool, it just happens to be dudes.
Right.
And,
but that's
and
changing.
ladies like Carrie Brownstein and Slater Kinney, who are making a comeback, people.
I think we are. Our new generation of guitarists is going to be much stronger in the equality of gender and you know the differences between male and women. I think eventually we'll probably equal out. And it's not about let's be PC and equal things out. It's not about that. It's about forgetting that this is a guy instrument or this is a girl instrument. It's more about not even noticing like, hey, there's just guitarists.
Well,
and that's it.
And I hope that is encouraging for any young ladies out there listening who might be passionate about music and wondering what instrument that they should play.
Yes.
That the classical guitar world needs you.
Yes.
And you should get involved.
We just need more guitarists, period.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like, really, ultimately.
We're
just
bringing you the light side.
Yeah.
To the dark side.
Well, Valerie Hartzell, we really appreciate you being on the show for a second time.
Thank you for having me.
You're crazy busy. You're flying back to the England.
Yes, tomorrow I fly back.
Well, we will miss you and hope you come back again.
I will. Thank you.
Everybody, that's about it for this episode of Classical Classroom. For more Classroom, go to houstonpublicmedia.org/classroom. You can listen to us on iTunes. You can see an extensive list of everything we have ever put out on our SoundCloud page. That's soundcloud.com/classical classroom. You can listen to us with your Stitcher Radio or TuneIn app. We're also on Twitter and Tumblr. I'm at CC Dacia. Todd, he needs followers, so make sure to follow him. It's at CC Todd H. Thanks today to audio producer Todd, not Tony Danza, Hulslander, for making us sound fabulous. To our program director St. John Flynn for always wearing adventurous socks. To Valerie Hartzell for being on the show. To me for saying words. And to you, listeners, for listening. We'll catch you next time.